Welcome back. You're listening to Conservative Conversations with Tom Saroof. And I'm very excited to be chatting with my guest today, Richard Corcoran, who is a lawyer and is the current president of the New College of Florida. And we talk about his new book, which is called Storming the Ivory Tower, and focuses on Richard's account of how he and the administration of the New College of Florida has turned that school around and has become a model for higher education reform in America. I enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you do too.
Join the best in the movement. It's Conservative Conversations with ISI, educating for liberty since 1953.
Richard, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, appreciate it. Great honor.
And to start, we're talking about New College of Florida, which you're the president of. But before we talk about New College, since we're talking about your leadership and how you approach things, I think, and as well as the transformation that's happened at the school, before we get to all of that, I think it'd be great for our listeners to hear more about you, your background, how you came to find yourself at New College, and everything that kind of has led up to that in your career and your life.
Yeah, I'll try to be short. It's sort of a long, circuitous route. Long story short, I'm a lawyer by trade. Ran for the I got involved in legislative politics when I was even an undergraduate with the Republican minority at the time in Florida. We only had about 45 members. We took over in 96 for the first time since Reconstruction. But during that time, whether it was undergrad or whether it was in law school, I did work with the Republican Party and work with the Republican House of Representatives in the state. Then after that, I was actually chief of staff for Marco Rubio when he was Speaker of the Florida House. And then after Marco left, I ran for office, got elected, and then I myself became Speaker of the House. And then after being Speaker of the House, it was 2018, Governor DeSantis was running for governor, obviously, and he asked me to head up his transition with, Matt Gaetz and some other leaders. And so I did that. And then during that transition, he had asked me to be the Commissioner of Education for the state. So I did that for 4 years, and then went out and back in private practice. And then the governor said that, hey, the trustees at New College are getting, reshuffled, and they might be interested in you being president. Would you be interested? And so then I reached out to one of the trustees and had a conversation and became president of New College. So basically, I guess you could say lawyer, speaker, lawyer, staffer, speaker, commissioner of education, president of New College.
Hey there, listener. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations. This podcast is a production of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and our mission here at ISI is educating for liberty. If you'd like to join us in fulfilling our mission, consider helping us by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, to help us reach more listeners like yourself. Now, back to the show. It's a really impressive resume. But yeah, so moving to New College, what was it like before Governor DeSantis basically stacked the board and then you became the president? And then could you also, maybe you could even talk about what that process looked like of, what was happening beforehand, what was the college like, and then the process of transformation and what things are happening now.
Yeah, I'll start with the transformation. So in Florida, we have 12 public universities. We have 28 public colleges or community colleges that are now offer 4-year degrees. And the governor chooses the trustees for those boards, and in combination with a board of governors at the university level, which he also appoints the board of governors, and they also appoint some folks too. So basically, the governor has tremendous influence, the short story. And each board of trustees for each of the universities has 13 members. 2 are automatic, a faculty member, student body president, and then the rest are appointed. And what happened, there was a vacancy of about a total of 7 positions on the New College board. So what the governor did, instead of appointing 1 or 2 at a time, he waited for them all to become available, and then he appointed the 6th, and he had the board of governors appointed the 7th, and so immediately there was a majority on the board of trustees. The reality is, much like the school, Tom, is that on the trustees themselves, there was 3 wonderful, fantastic members who welcomed this new, bolt of energy, bolt of vision onto the trustees because they were the minority. There was only three of them, and they were getting, anytime they tried to do something that was normal or beneficial to the school, they would get stopped by the other board of trustees members. So the reality was he appointed seven, and there was already, three that were there that were really, really wonderful. And then he appointed one more ultimately shortly thereafter. So, the 11 appointed positions are all just wonderful, new, and or had been on the board and were already welcoming that change. So that was significant. The college itself at that point in time, I like to say that in the first chapter of the book, I talk at length because I didn't want people to say, okay, this is what the governor said. This is what he's a conservative. This is what the president said. He's a conservative. This is what the trustees are saying. Most of them, or if not all of them, are conservative. I wanted it to be a definition of what the school was from former faculty, existing faculty, former administration, outside groups that the administration had studied the school on why it was such a difficult place and it wasn't succeeding in recruiting students and keeping students. Students, the student newspaper, so I basically, the whole first chapter is just direct quotes from all of those people, long before Governor DeSantis appointed anybody, long before the trustees chose me to be their president. Here's what everyone said about that college, whether it was Princeton Reviews, you name it. And the reality was it was a hard, progressive left campus whose culture was defined by these folks long before us as absolute toxic. And so you would have students who would identify as liberal and they would say, I'm leaving because I got canceled. I'm not progressive enough. It was just a massive, probably I would argue in the top, whatever that number is, top 5, top 10 most liberal progressive schools in the country. And even, some of the students I direct quote them, it was known for being, a campus of weirdos and druggies. They had drug deaths. It was chaos. It really was a failing institution all the way around. And part of the reason was because there was just abject chaos. There was chaos in almost all aspects. And it wasn't a nice place to be. You'd be there for 30 days and you're like, this is awful. I can't make friends. I'm bullied. I'm picked on. I'm all of those different things, which we saw in that transition. We had to deal with assaults and batteries. We had to deal with, massive shout downs and, crazy, in many cases, unhinged behavior. And so that's really where the impetus for all of this came. The governor's like, this is a public institution. It's funded by taxpayers. This cannot exist. Nobody deserves or should be forced or even choose to go to a school where all you're hearing is a radical one side, not just even, the middle of one side, the radical of one side point of view. That's not an education. That's indoctrination, and it has to stop. And I don't care what side it comes from. I mean, what we have really strived to do in this last 18 months is get that beautiful balance. If we always say it's about teaching kids how to think, not what to think. And if you get great professors, maybe some are, identify as liberal, maybe some identify as conservative, not our issue, but we want balance on that faculty. Let the students hear and let them be taught wonderfully by great faculty, regardless of that, as long as it's balanced. And let them decide what it is that they want to think ultimately. And that's where we're heading. We're not, every day you have to fight because it's a public institution. You got unions, you have grievances, you have all these things. But we're going to create, I think, the nation's best balanced, wonderful liberal arts college.
It sounds like a fantastic proposition. And in the last 18 months, what are the sorts of things, because what you just described does not sound like a place where learning can really take place. So what are the things that you've been doing in the last 18 months to transform the culture of a place like New College and kind of make it a place where learning can be taken seriously as the primary goal of a university?
Yeah, there's so many, and I'll rattle them off. But, basically I think, and I'll juxtapose this against some of the other universities on the national level. But first and foremost, I think where we saw, because you measure kids in Florida, students, you measure, okay, if they come there for their first year and they leave, what's the reasoning? And in that measurement, what the reasoning was basically it was just a toxic culture more than anything else. Personal health issues, um, couldn't get along with anybody, couldn't find a friend, was bullied, all of those types of issues. So we knew we had to fix that toxicity and do it quickly. And honestly, the easiest way to do that is just basically have an adherence to a just, a fair, a constitutional, a rule of law. You just can't have abject chaos. You can't have people getting assaulted or threatened or bullied, and there's not a repercussion. And that's what you saw in those northern schools. Bill Ackman, he's identified. I'm putting words to his career and his donations, but you would say he's an identifiable liberal donor. Historically, this is not a conservative, but he graduated from Harvard. He had a child who graduated from Harvard, and he starts looking at this chaos that's happening post October 7th, and he sends the president a list of 7 items, I think it was, in his first letter. And 4 of the 7 items were, can we have a basic rule of law? My words, not his. If someone's assaulted, can there be discipline? If someone is, shouted down, if someone's being blocked entry, if someone is being accused, is there some sort of basic rule of law? Not biased, just a truly fair, truly due process, truly equal protection, but a real process that's fair. And we had to do that same thing. And in doing so, we found out that, we don't know, for decades, maybe longer, that the school had a student conduct board that had never been constituted. So when we started having these cases and we're looking at it, I'm a lawyer by trade. Okay, send it to I want to, justice that's swift and fair is the best kind. So let's give these students the full opportunity to be heard, and let's do it quickly so they can make decisions if there's going to be a negative outcome. And they find out that that student conduct board's never been constituted. So we had to go find, it was in the student handbook, it was in the faculty book, referenced everywhere, never actually existed. And so we had to find faculty to be on the board. We had to find students to be on the board and start. So it delayed the process a little bit. But as soon as we started saying, okay, there's one case, these are egregious cases. I don't want you to think that they were iffy. And, these are spitting on people during a protest. And so you went through that process, and they were, ultimately recommended for expulsion. And the students chose, and rather to have that final outcome, they would rather transfer and voluntarily leave under the terms of the agreement, which they did. But once that started happening, it doesn't take long. When you see sort of, even in this country, where there seems to be a lack of a rule of law in cities and counties and states, it doesn't take long for there to be a rule of law put into place that the adherence comes very, very quickly when there's real consequences. When there's zero consequences, when you can go into a CVS and take whatever you want and walk out of it, you're going to have chaos, abject chaos, and it's going to happen quickly. The reverse is true too. You start putting boundaries and laws that are just and fair around that behavior gets corrected quickly. And so we had to do the rule of law was, a big one. And it's one of the recommendations. You have to have a rule of law. Of course it has to be just. Of course it has to be constitutional, but you have to have that in order to maintain a decent campus. I could keep rattling off. There's about 9 ideas that we implemented in New College, but they're all along those lines.
Yeah, what you're saying reminds me of the first chapter of Russell Kirk's The Roots of American Order. Order is the first, order in the soul, order in the city. This is the sort of the first need of all, before you can arrive at, other things, other goods. But you have this sort of chaos. Your civilization is in a lot of trouble, to put it lightly. That makes sense. I'm turning towards in the classroom, conservatives all the way from the beginning. Buckley's first book, Got a Man at Yale, The Superstitions of Academic Freedom, and actually ISI just had a panel between Michael Knowles and Robert George about academic freedom in the university. So in the classroom, you want this sort of balance, intellectually, the sort of intellectual ferment and diversity. And I wonder how you come down on the sort of academic freedom versus, aggressively isn't the word, but maybe forthrightly marking and stamping the mission of the institution on the people who go in to be formed by it. What your sort of view of that kind of debate is, in terms of what you're trying to do at New College in the classroom with students.
Yeah, I believe in full, real academic freedom. The funny part is We talked about having free speech and civil discourse, and now you look, and I talk about it, but the radical left is now saying that free speech is not safe. It's going to George Orwell and Animal Farm, where all of us are equal, but some of us are just more equal than others, and we'll let you
Right.
know who those are. And in doing that, so since we're more equal, free speech is dangerous. We can't just give it to anybody because they might misuse it. And they might talk about things that we find abhorrent, like equality or free speech in and of itself. So we have to quell that. To have true academic freedom, I think here's some of the things I think that are missing in the university system, and that's a very distinguished panel. I've spent some time with Robbie George. The You have to have shared governance, and I think what's happened over the years, you talk about it, well, Christopher Rufo wrote the foreword in my book, and his first paragraph is basically, we've been through this forever. This is nothing new, what we're fighting. To your point, a 20-year-old kid at Yale wrote a book, in the 1950s about, hey, I'm getting indoctrinated in the classroom. And then there's book after book, Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. This has been written for decades, if not half a century or more. And so the real question is, how do you fix it? How do you really fix it? And I think one of those issues that have happened over those years is we have this thing called shared governance. And shared governance basically says that the faculty, by and large, are in charge of what students get accepted, what faculty get hired, and what courses are offered. I mean, that's basically all that matters. The administration, you guys go raise money and keep the doors open and pay the electric bill. We're going to do all this other stuff. Well, what happened over time, which is obviously the case that you would expect to happen, is like people that want to have somebody bought into the fold invariably choose like-minded people.
Right.
All of us do. And so over time, with the left being actively involved in the academy, it became, center left, left, hard left. And now basically you look at the stats, 90 something, 97, 98% of all faculty I identify as liberals, vote for the Democratic candidates, and are not supportive in general of having that greater diversity of thought in the academy. And so you have to fix that. I just think if you go out there and you get great faculty members, so we've hired about 46 new faculty members. We don't ask their ideology. We don't ask their political leanings or backgrounds. I mean, where do you fall in your teaching of students? One of the great faculty that we hired, he's in his 80s, is a legend. He's written tons of books, is Stanley Fish. Stanley Fish is a vocal Democrat, raised a Democrat. But Stanley believes that in real academic freedom, we have a whole Socratic stage debate with Stanley Fish where he talks about academic freedom means you get up there and you teach the students the subject matter. You teach them excellently. You teach them, yes, you can bring in all these different vantage points. I also think that's a quick aside. A funny thing about the left, when the governor, or when I was Commissioner of Education, we said, okay, we're not going to allow these books to be shown to 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And it's basically, there's an age appropriateness to books. And there's some books that shouldn't even be in the classroom. If there's 5-year-olds and elementary students having books about graphic sexual activities, that's never appropriate. But there's also age appropriate books. The left, when we do that, they always come out and they say, we're banning Shakespeare. Nobody's banning Shakespeare. They always go to that extreme statement, we're saying the bill is going to be rebranded, don't say gay. Nowhere in the bill does it say you can't say gay. It's about an age appropriate book in front of a 5, a 6, a 7-year-old. But they do that. And I think it's the same thing with academic freedom. Is we come in and we say, we just want balance. We want to have these faculty members teach the heck out of their courses and not indoctrinate, and educate those kids so that they can figure out what they want to think. And that's the job. Of course, they immediately say, I don't care if it's Chronicle Flyers Ed, Inside Higher Ed, oh, we're bringing in all these right wingers and we're changing it into it's the complete opposite. Who has done that and who is doing that over the last 70 years has been the left. Right. We have no interest in that. In fact, Christopher Rufo, one of the early meetings when he came down to the board and immediately and said, I'll speak to the whole community, faculty, staff, alumni. And he says, if you think we came to supplant a campus that's strictly one ideology for the most part and supplants it with the ideology from the other side, you're sadly mistaken because they're equally both reprehensible. And so really, if you get those great faculty that come in and they come recommended, and you really do vet them, and you really do have a process of faculty doing the interviews, faculty doing having them give a speech and a presentation like we did, and you really say to them, you have real academic freedom here. We had professors from all over the country say, look, if you're really going to be about academic freedom and free speech, I will come because I don't have it at my campus right now. And they could have been center right, center left. We didn't ask, but those are the types of, and these are Ivy Leaguers, Stanford's, Chicago's, you name it, faculty that are coming. And yeah, I think when you get that balance right, and it's really about balance, that is that beautiful point when you have real academic freedom and real free speech, and you allow that marketplace of ideas to just explode on a campus and students to be able to hear and see and shop intellectually any store, any thought, which is wonderful.
Absolutely. And like, what are the sorts of questions that you're asking? Because if the university faculty were overwhelmingly left-wing, and you're now trying to instill balance without necessarily screening for ideology or having like oh, we're gonna have our conservative quota. We need, 50% this, 50% that. If we want to be, I guess, content neutral or content blind in hiring with respect to ideology, what are the sorts of questions that you're asking to ensure that the professors or the faculty share the values of genuine academic freedom and trying to create this sort of intellectual ferment on a campus that would allow students to encounter a wide array of perspectives, left, right, center?
The biggest thing is just to champion legitimately, truly, sincerely free speech and academic freedom. We're a small school. We're smaller than most elementary schools. I mean, when I got here, there were 600 students. We're now pushing 900 in just 18 months. And it's the same thing with the students as it is with the faculty. As it is with the faculty. If you champion that, it's really going to be an environment of free speech. It's really going to be true academic freedom. We're going to bring in the best and the brightest minds. And we were in the news a lot. So obviously we've been in the news a ton. A unheard of amount for a college our size. So all of those things coming together in the news. This is what we're championing. We literally had solicitations just coming forth. And the biggest impetus for those solicitations of people being interested in becoming faculty members or applying as students, and that was the biggest question. So when we had them and we had the interviews and we had them interview with everybody and ultimately with the provost and myself, the biggest questions that they had for us is, the biggest single question they had for us is, I've read about you. I've heard what you're saying. I want to know, is it real? Because I've heard this song and dance before. And so then when they get a chance to meet with us, they get a chance to meet with maybe the trustees or the provost, and they believe that there really is this, environment where you can have that, which historically is going all the way back to, Socrates. That's a beautiful environment when you have that kind of balanced approach and that real opening of the minds on campus. And so I think, and in those conversations, you could tell, okay, this is somebody who really wants to be a part of this new, truly civil discourse, free speech, academic freedom that we're building. But again, so we really never got into part of the simple way of doing it is if you really champion it, and if you're an academic and you're really interested in being in that kind of environment, and you do go and interview, I think to the credit of the academics, they can tell real fast, this is another one of those song and dances, very performative and not real. I think they could tell that too. So our recruitment has been outstanding. We're probably going to have another, because we're growing so fast. We're the fastest growing university in the system, just in the last 18 months. And so we're going to have another 20 or 25 academics come, new academics. And we just, and now you have that self-fulfilling prophecy where you came from, let's just say, Chicago, and you're teaching political science, and you're saying, you're not going to believe this place. It is in a beautiful way, laissez-faire, real academic freedom. You can teach the heck, you can, explore different avenues to bring about a wonderful higher educational system. You ought to come too. And so we're seeing a lot of that now. We're seeing a lot more people being attracted in the tentacles of the existing faculty and the faculty that we hired. But I honestly, higher ed has gotten so bad uh, over that 70 years that having an environment that truly is and living out that free speech, civil discourse, and academic freedom, it's a real draw for people from around the country. And it's that old, I don't want to say Supreme Court decision, but I think an academic member, what is academic freedom? What is free speech? What's civil discourse? The old, paraphrasing that you know it when you see it, or you know it when you are around it. Is there a specific action? It's a lot of actions, and it's got to be sincere and authentic.
What has been the effect on student life, student learning? There's a whole chapter in your book about New College as a case study. You've talked about how academic freedom, a genuine environment of freedom to teach and to give your perspective as a faculty member without fear of censure, either by basically all of your colleagues or the students or some administrator who wants to crack down on you for saying something that's unsafe or challenges the so-called safety of a student for expressing an idea that they might not like. But what's been the impact on students and their learning and their perspective on questions like this, which are very important questions, not just educationally, but also politically?
Yeah, I would say again, it's a 4-year institution. We have
Hmm.
a couple master's programs, but generally it's a 4 years teaching institution. And so, when we started, we were recruiting the first class for the fall of 23, and then we've had now the fall of 24. So you had this, big blow up uh, media, alumni, all these different folks saying, "Hey, it's going to be a civil war. You're going to have these older students who are of this one, ideology, and these newer students that are going to be this other ideology." I think in a lot of ways, 18 to 22-year-olds haven't, most of them haven't, formulated their ideology. Most of them are going because they want to, continue their education, continue their learning, maybe play sports, all of those different reasons. There's obviously people that have thought quite lengthy about what they believe and what they want to study. But we didn't have that civil war. It was very much more harmonious than anybody predicted. And we had the New York Times, Washington Post, and as a side, just to say the difficulty in which you have to move forward in this 18 months. We have I think we're up to 66 or 67 different acts of litigation or grievances. So we've had internal audits, external audits, state audits, federal audits, grievances from the union, lawsuits, federal lawsuits, statewide, shutdown, stop orders from counties and cities. I mean, we're up to about, this school never had a faculty grievance in its 63-year history. We're on faculty grievance number 14 in 18 months. I mean, it's a literal, constant fight to get to that balance. And that balance is also part of the students. So take, in the school being 600 kids, and let's say I think for the most part, a lot of those students really did want to get a great liberal arts education. To the ones that came because they thought this is a radical haven. The ones that I talk about it at length in the first chapter, they didn't want to be a part of it at all. A lot of them left and transferred. But the new flux of the largest class ever in 23, the largest class ever in 24, breaking the 23 class, balanced with the students that really wanted to stay, created a really good environment for academic excellence, and to have that diversity of thought, and to have those conversations. And we just stress, more than anything, it has to be civil. You're allowed to express, you have that free speech right, and we're going to protect that free speech right. And if you don't like something someone's saying, we are going to protect you by allowing more free speech, not less free speech. But I think generally, you create that culture. It's a contagious culture. It's an infectious culture because it's a wonderful environment to be in, even if you disagree with the person that's you're arguing with.
You were speaking a minute ago about some of the challenges or blowback that's been not just in the media, but in terms of like lawsuits and grievances. I wonder if you could talk more about some of the challenges that you've been facing in turning things around and what that's been like.
Yeah, I could give example after example, and that's, I went through, here's all the things you had headlines, Chronicles of Fire Head, Washington Post, New York Times. In fact, I very sincerely, but somewhat tongue in cheek, dedicated the book. They're like, hey, you have to dedicate your book. You want to dedicate your wife or your children? And my wife and I have 6 kids. And I was like, no, I dedicate to the New York Times and the Washington Post and our local papers, because without them, not a single chapter of this book would have ever even been conceived, let alone written. I mean, the level of bias and hubris and fighting for their narrative at all costs is just extraordinary. And it's even on a national level. So I'll give you two good examples. One, in February, January 6th is when the governor appointed the new trustees. And, within like 90 days, the trustees voted to get rid of DEI on the campus, and we did all of that. At the same point that the governor appointed these trustees and they were eradicating DEI at a school of 600 people at the time, Biden implements an executive order that basically says we're going to have squads or teams of DEI at every single state agency. I mean, a federal agency. Every single agency is going to have basically a DEI squad. Nothing's written about it, no litigation. It affects every single tentacle of federal government to the nth degree, from defense to education to you name it. But our trustees say that we're going to get rid of DEI at a school of about 600 people with an office of about one director and a few other people, and there's probably 1,000 articles written about how this is awful. And now fast forward, that was in February, March. Fast forward to October. Obviously, even Bill Ackman's like, wait a second, what's this DEI office doing? And at Harvard, it was DEIB. They added belonging. The irony of it, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It did none of those things, unless you were in that little, George Orwell Animal Farm, where the more equal people, then you were definitely in it. But if you were on the outside, you were chastised, criticized, bullied, harassed, all those other things. And even Bill Ackman says he thinks a lot of the problems that existed in all these institutions is you have this absolute catastrophic ideology, critical race theory, and you have this arm of DEI in every single university, now every single federal agency that's implementing and being the law enforcement of it. So anyway, you just can't even juxtapose the federal government mandating at every agency, New College getting rid of a small DI office, and 1,000 articles over here and nothing over here. Tons of litigation over here, zero over here from anybody, conservatives either. It's ridiculous. But then there's all these issues. We started a sports program. We had a mascot chosen by one of the current students, drew this beautiful concept because there's banyan trees all over the property because they were given to the Ringlings when they moved down there from, I think Edison gave them a bunch of banyan trees. So there's banyan trees all over the property. And she created this mighty banyan. It looks fierce with its, arms flexing. And, the newspaper wrote that our mascot was racist. And Christopher Rufo said, I guess if you're driving down the road and you look at a tree and you think racist thoughts, you're a racist. It's just crazy stuff. We had dorms that had black mold, and one of the students said to me, "Hey, there's mold in these schools." So we had environmental groups come out, scan the whole buildings, and they basically said, the kids graduated May, so we had the studies, and they said, don't bring kids back in those dorms. And so we shut down these dorms and said, we're not putting kids back in there. We had to go get neighboring hotels and whatever, because not only are we shutting down those dorms, we're growing rapidly because of the change in leadership. And you would have thought that we were the worst human beings in the world because we're saving students from black mold dormitories, putting them in beautiful hotels right next to the campus, and we're the bad guys. I mean, what were we supposed to do? Leave them in the black mold like the previous administrations had done? It's insane. But article after article about how this is an atrocious treatment of the students and what have you. That's how biased and fake the narrative is. Which is why I dedicated the book to them. But this, I could, and there are a lot of it's in the book, but I could go through every single thing we did was an absolute torrential mistake of epic proportions that was going to bring down, the world, and none of it Zero of it has been true, and none of the litigation has succeeded. We've won on every single front. And I, in fact, when I had New York Times reporters call me and I said, look, why don't you do this? Why don't you come visit? You can write your article now, and why don't you come visit a year from now? None of them have taken us up on it. Not a single reporter has come to visit that which they write, just epically about and volumes. None of them have come to actually see the campus and see the transformation and talk to the students and see it is a tremendous, and it's the same thing with the faculty. We brought in these new faculty, just like there's students that came here and they wanted to have a great opportunity to learn at a world-class institution. There were faculty who came here and wanted to be able to teach and their craft to perfection without indoctrination. And so I think whether it's the trustees that were already here, the faculty that were already here, students that are already here, a ton of them felt like, finally, why did it take you guys so long to come and build out this beautiful, balanced institution that we've been waiting for so long?
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I've got one more question for you, which is, you're at in a position of leadership in these battles for what I would call a reconquest of institutions of higher education. And I'm wondering what you think, A, about how applicable or how wide this model could be for, like I said, reconquering, or maybe you just say rebalancing higher education. And then the second part of that question is, what would you tell to other people who could be in your type of position about what they need to know going in so they see, eyes clearly as they're going in?
Well, first, Christopher Rufo at the end of his forward basically said, after, hey, we've been through this, there's God, Man, and Yale, there's, closing the American mind, are we going to have another 3-4 decades of just having a conversation? We got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing something at New College, and clearly it can be replicated. That's, I think, somebody said at one point, the issue with New College is you guys are clearly over the target because you're a public school, you're making these radical changes. It's being, thrust upon all the other universities in our system and outside, saying, why can't you guys do this too? And so you're over the target. Otherwise, why would a school of our size just have volumes and volumes and volumes of articles and editorials and newspapers and media all over our campus for the last year and a half? And so to Christopher Ruffer's point, we are doing it. It can be done. I would say, if I had one piece of advice for a state or a lawmaker or even a president of a university that wants to have this, create real balance and real change, that every day is a fight, you have to have real leadership. And what we have in Florida is kind of special. I mean, Governor DeSantis just at some point said, this is not happening. He took on the K-12 world. Then he's looking at the higher education world and he says, this is public tax dollars. We're going to change this. And he started appointing board members who were more inclined to philosophically create how do we even keep a self-governing country? The greatest threat isn't Russia. It's not China. It's not radical jihadism. The greatest threat to our country, we're seeing it played out, is internally we're imploding because our education system is so flawed. And if you want to protect that beautiful republic that has changed, the greatest of all time, that has changed the world over multiple times, you have to create well-educated individuals, and it's worth the fight. And so if you have to have that governor who appoints these great trustees, you have to have trustees who understand and are mission aligned, and they have to choose a president who understands mission aligned because he's there every day, or she. And if you have those three things, you can move fast and you can move radically well, and make those changes. But if you don't have that, it's, I can tell you story after story, you've probably read them, after Governor DeSantis said, New College and our trustees got rid of DEI before anyone even asked us or told us. I mean, Christopher Rufo's written a whole book. I said, this is appalling. We're getting rid of it. Then, because New College did it, the legislature passed a bill under Governor DeSantis's leadership saying all the universities have to get rid of DEI. And then other states saw what was happening in Florida and got to understand what DEI really was, and they started eradicating DEI. And then you read these stories, Oklahoma, Texas, great states. So basically the leadership at those universities are, undercover reporters went in there and said, hey, do you still have DEI? Yeah, we had to get rid of it, but it's still here. We use it another name. Nobody's gone. Everyone's still here. We're still doing it. I mean, that's what you have. And those are red states. It's, so you have to have that leadership, and you have to have that leadership have real courage to go in there from the bottom up and make those systemic changes. But if you do, it's although it's a fight every day, as long as those three, you got a governor and a trustees and the president are mission aligned, it's arduous, but you can be successful very fast. We're not done yet. We got a lot more we want to do. But obviously we were able to just do some amazing changes in 18 months.
Yeah, of course. And to your point, the education system is terrible to the point where we're seeing now in outlets such as The Atlantic that students can't read whole books. But it sounds like New College is not that way, at least not anymore, with the changes you've made. So congratulations to you, Richard, and keep up the good work. And the book, for our listeners, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, is Storming the Ivory Tower, which by the time this episode comes out should be available, but at the very least we'll put the link for pre-order in our show notes. But aside from reading that book, Richard, what would you recommend to listeners who want to follow more of your work?
Yeah, hopefully purchase the book, as you said, but on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Richard Corcoran. So you can follow me there too.
Excellent. Well, as I said, keep up the good work, and thanks again, Richard.
Thanks. Honored to be on the show.
Thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations with ISI. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our website at isi.org/resources to see all that we offer our members, including the Intercollegiate Review, select modern age articles, debates, lectures, and of course, this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and we will see you next time on Conservative Conversations with ISI.